Good morning. Welcome to another episode of Kingdom Inspired Kidz Podcast, where parents talk. I'm your host, Calvette Boyd, a parent, an advocate, and someone who knows firsthand the realities of supporting children with ADD as well as ADHD. Today, I'll be diving into a conversation that many teachers and parents are having behind the scenes, but not nearly talked enough in the public. Teachers and ADHD, what's missing in the classroom? Let's be honest, this is going to be a good one. Today's classrooms are more diverse. They're more high needs, they're more complex than ever before. Things are just changing. The world is continuously evolving. But the training and support teachers receive, I don't know that that's really has been kept up. And our ADHD children are often the ones who feel the consequences the most. Maybe you've heard your child's teacher say things like, he just can't sit still. She's always distracted. Well, they just talk too much. They're always into something. They finish their homework too fast or they don't finish it at all. What you rarely hear is what's really going on. A child whose brain operates differently and a teacher who was never given the training, the tools, or the time to support the difference. Do we really, people in the education field, do you really feel like you've had the training that you need? I know I have people that are close to me and family members that have said, hey, this teaching thing, like I'm ready to give it up because there's so many changes in children and their behavior, and the teachers just don't feel like they're supported in what they need to be able to operate effectively in their classrooms. So today we're breaking this down piece by piece, not to blame teachers, not to blame the educators, but to highlight the gaps and talk about real solutions that our kids and our teachers need. Because when parents and teachers understand, like you truly understand ADHD, everything changes. Behavior improves, relationships grow, and your children will begin to thrive. So let's get into it. The teacher training gap. Teachers aren't taught a lot about ADHD beyond just the basics. You hear a lot of things like I talked about before where they say your children, like they're talking too much or they're not sitting in their seat, they're fidgeting, they're on the move, they're all over the classroom, they're disrupting the classroom. But most teacher preparation programs spend less than a few hours or a couple of days. When it comes to the training, and do they really spend time when it comes to ADHD and other disabilities? If any time is spent, how much? That means teachers enter the classroom, they know that ADHD exists. They know that it affects kids and their focus. And they also know that it impacts their behavior, like the behavior of the children. But what most teachers are not taught is the difference between inattention, distractibility, and overwhelm. Teachers may also not be taught how ADHD affects working memory and transitions. I know as a parent, I remember being in an appointment, and I remember the doctor saying to me, children with ADHD, they hear you having a conversation with them, but their brain is reaching and grabbing the different words and trying to put it together to make it make sense. So if a teacher doesn't know that, because I as a parent didn't know that until I was taught that, if a teacher doesn't know that, then it makes it harder to have that communication and really understand who that child is or what they need. Teachers may also not be taught why traditional discipline doesn't work. I've had that conversation over and over with educators. I've had that same conversation over and over with family members. and with parents and guardians, because I hear a lot of, well, if you would do this, then your kid they would behave, or, well, what worked back then, it'll work right now. Traditional discipline does not work with these children. It absolutely does not work with our children. What teachers also may not be taught is how ADHD kids interpret the tone of your voice differently. As a parent, have you ever seen or had a conversation with your child and your child is saying, "Why are you yelling at me?" You never yelled, but in their brain heard you yell. Teachers may also not be taught how to structure lessons so that the kids are not overstimulated. Let me give you some examples. Like, a teacher may see a child tapping their pencil. They're shifting around in their seat. They're walking around because they can't be still. And the teacher sees that as defiance. In reality, that movement helps the child regulate their nervous system so that they can pay attention. I can tell you, as a parent, these are things that most educators that my children have had throughout their years of school did not understand. And so you take a child and you put them into this environment. We send our children to school so that they can learn, but we don't always build those relationships so that the educators, those teachers, really understand. And that's the reason it's so hard to have, it's so important to have a great relationship with, your child's school, their teachers, and all of that, because it's so important, because they're so misunderstood. My key message here is that ADHD behavior is communication, but teachers often lack the training to interpret what the child is really trying to say. So I know a lot of times my daughter has been where she's like trying to get her point across, and I'm just like, just let it go. And she's like, no, like, I need to be heard. And sometimes we as parents don't hear them. So do you really think educators hear them? Especially if they've not been trained when it comes to ADHD and what that really means. So the support gap. Teachers don't have the resources to meet ADHD needs. Even teachers, a lot of times, who want to understand the ADHD struggle, they're stretched really thin, because a lot of times our children need frequent check-ins. You got to constantly check on them. Consistent transitions, visual reminders, structured routines, and calm correction instead of loud discipline. But teachers often have 20 to 35 students. The teacher's in the classroom by themselves. They don't have an aide. There's no behavioral specialists in the classrooms. There's a lot of high emotional demands. And then we have teachers that have the pressure of teaching a test. The special education departments are sometimes the largest departments in our schools. I bet you guys didn't know that. But the special education department is usually very overwhelmed, and it's usually the largest department in our schools. Let me give you an example. A child may need to take a 30-second reset break, but the teacher has 25 other students needing something at the same time. So what is the result? The child that needed that 30-second break just so that they could reset, it appears to the teacher that the child is being disruptive, but the environment simply can't support their needs consistently. So how is that fair to the child, and how is it fair to the teacher? It's not. So the tools gap. Teachers don't have practical classroom strategies that actually work for them. Most ADHD information teachers receive is high level theory, not hands on tools. So, what teachers need are simple, ready to use support such as visual schedule posters showing the day's routines. I know some classrooms that I've been into, you see their daily routine is very, very easy to understand. Even if it's a child that gets distracted, they can go back and look at that visual schedule poster and it shows everything that's going on in the classroom for that day. Movement, they also need things like movement friendly seating, like wiggle tools or an option to stand. I know there was a classroom that I was in one time and there was one of those balls. And so that kid was like sitting on the ball and they were kind of bouncing around. Is it disruptive to other kids? Yes, it can be. But the kid was over to the side doing the bouncing and all that stuff to kind of stay, that helped them with their nervous system so that they could focus. Teachers also need things like clear step-by-step instruction cards. They could also have something like a calm down corner or a sensory tool. I know that I've been into a classroom as well where there was a calm down corner. I guess it used to be a closet, and they took that closet and cleared it out and had like a trampoline in there. I've seen where they have like the balls where the kids can get on the ball and bounce. I've seen classrooms that have had a chair in there and like a dim light, because sometimes with sensory and all that stuff, lighting affects children. So those are some really good things that teachers need, and they're ready to use supports that can help them. They also need things like short, predictable transitions. For example, when the timer goes off, finish your last sentence and line up. I've seen that work. I've seen that work very well in some classrooms. So why tools matter is something that I want to discuss. Why are these tools, why do they matter so much, and how can we get past the tools gap? Well, ADHD kids, they thrive on consistency, being predictable. They like things that are predictable, and they like clear expectations. You cannot muddy the water when it comes to our children. They need a consistent bedtime. They need a consistent routine. They need a consistent get up time. They need a consistent list of the things that they have to do. They need clear expectations, because when they have to figure it out, sometimes that's too much for them. I've had that conversation before with family members, like choices sometimes is too much for them. A lot of different choices, it's just too much for them because of the way that their brain thinks and the way their nervous system is. So ADHD kids like the visuals and the routines, those things, the consistent predictability and the consistency of things, those things calm their brain. Sounds strange, huh? But it calms their brain and it reduces that impulsive behavior that they sometimes have. This is where your teacher, the 80, like if a teacher could do things like have visual prompts or like a checklist. A lot of kids like checklists, and some people like, have you ever worked with someone as an adult? Have you ever worked with someone, a coworker, peer, your boss, or whoever, and they have to have a checklist? Some people need that. So our kids function better with the checklist, and so would our teachers if they had that for our kids. Strategies for transitions. We're going to go from lunch to the playground, and this is how we line up for that, so they know. Things like classroom management tips would really, really help our teachers. And these tools help teachers. It helps them to reduce the chaos, and it also helps the ADHD, our kids, understand what to do, when to do it, and it helps them stay regulated. The next thing I want to talk about, what our classrooms are missing, is the communication gap. Parents and teachers aren't sharing what works. They're not having those discussions. Most parents know their child's triggers, they know their strengths, they know their patterns, and that information rarely makes it into the classroom because I'm telling you, sometimes as parents, we're embarrassed, but you shouldn't be embarrassed because God gave you these kids for a reason. And so if you know your child's triggers and their strengths and their patterns, you need to share that information with their teachers. What time of day your kid struggles the most, when they're the happiest, what time of day their medication usually wears off, and when you'll start seeing the more impulsive behavior, whether hunger or sensory overload affects their behavior, what helps them reset, how do you keep them focused, how do you keep their attention, how much direction they need. Strategies that work at home are sometimes strategies that can work in school as well if we as parents just share that information with the teachers. Let me give you an example. If a teacher knows your child needs instruction broken into 3 small steps instead of one big lecture, then the misunderstandings disappear. All you have to do is say, hey, my child needs this broken down into 3 steps. Here's step number 1, step number 2, step number 3, and then they get it. But if you're doing a long lecture and a kid is in a classroom for 45 minutes and you expect to keep their attention, you got to be a good teacher to be able to keep their attention. Remember, they may be on medication or they may be a child that is focused for a little bit, but for 45 minutes, heck, it's hard for me to stay focused for 45 minutes and just sit and just listen to a lecture. I'm antsy myself. So if a teacher knows that, then and that your children needed to be broken down into 3 steps, it just makes those misunderstandings disappear, and it makes it a better relationship when it comes to the communication with your child and the teacher. The child becomes more responsible, the teacher feels more supported, and the parent feels heard. Now, that is about all I have for you guys today. But today's episode shines a light on something simple but powerful. ADHD isn't a classroom problem like a lot of times we hear it is. It's a classroom support problem. Teachers aren't failing. Parents aren't failing. And sometimes teachers go home and they're exhausted and they're just like, oh my gosh, I'm trying everything and it's not working. Parents, when your children aren't doing their best, you feel like as a parent you're failing. I felt the same way. So I'm right there with you. Our children aren't failing. The system in the education field is missing the training, time, and tools that ADHD students require. But the good news is, as parents, we can change that together with the educators. Listen, if you're a teacher listening today, thank you for all you do. Thank you for your support. Thank you for all of the things that you are trying to do in the classroom to make it work. Thank you for all that you're trying to do to figure it out so that our babies, when they're in school, they get the best education possible. Thank you. I want to say I appreciate you. If you are a parent, your voice matters, and your advocacy for your child makes a difference. And if you want to equip your child's teacher with tools that reduce stress and improve their behavior as well, be sure to take note on everything that I talked about in this podcast today. Listen, guys, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode of Kingdom Inspired Kidz Podcast, where parents talk. We air every Wednesday at 7 a.m. Central Time. And share this episode with the teacher, parent, school administrator, or anyone who needs this information. Until next time, keep believing, keep advocating for your kids, and keep inspiring your kids. I always say, mom, dad, grandparents, guardians, teachers, you're doing a great job. You've got this. Listen, Kingdom Inspired Kidz is powered by CTR Media Network. You can watch us all over the world So please go ahead, like, comment, and subscribe. Turn on those post notifications so that you will always catch us when we're live. Thank you so much, and I hope you guys have an amazing rest of your day.